All right, so I imported in the files that I'm going to be using. I imported in 3 background layers of files. I have a foreground layer, which is kind of hard to see in here, but it's black because it has an alpha channel so we can see through it. A midground layer with a little bit of black showing through here so we could see through to the sky layer, which we won't see too much of this in this. It would only showing through where the black is there. And then I imported in a character for my walk cycle or walking, whatever your character's doing. But in this case, for this part of the assignment, you don't have to have animation done. So I'm using just a black and white image of my character as placeholder art for where I'm going to place in my animation when I get to that point. So for you, for this assignment, you just need to worry about getting your backgrounds painted and doing one 3D camera move to one of your backgrounds. If you do more, that's good, but we want to at least have one of them completed. So what I'm going to do is set up what I'm going to call a pre-comp. It's going to set up my scene before I put the camera moves on it. I'm going to set that up at the full size of my background elements. So I am going to click on this one background element, which is my midground, and I'm seeing the size of it is 2360 by 1000 pixels, so 23 pixels wide by 1000 pixels tall. So I'm going to make a comp at that size. So composition, new comp, then I'm going to, what is it? And I can see it, 2360, tab over to 1000. I have my lock aspect ratio is not checked because it's not a common aspect ratio. I'm working at, and this is important when you're setting up your frame rate. Whatever you did your animatic to, you want to set up the frame rate for your projects to be consistent. So set it, if you did it at 24, make sure you set it that, or if you did it at 30, so the 24 would be 23.97. Or the 30. 29. I'm going to do a 29. I'm going to do a 10-second move. I mean, you're going to do it by your scenes. I don't know if you broke down your scenes and got the times of the individual scenes or not. But it'd be a good idea. So you know I'm doing this in After Effects. I'm going to do it per scene and then bring everything together into Premiere to complete the final movie. So got the size, frame rate, the length, okay. So that created this comp 1. Actually, I could give it the name. Probably a good idea to do that. So composition settings, and I'll call this 2 pre-comp. So this is my pre-comp 2 that I'm creating here. So you give it a name. So now I'm going to take these background elements and put them into this composition, and it looked like they layered nicely for me. If they weren't, I could relayer them. And then I'm going to bring in my placeholder art of my character. I'm going to bring that in, and I'm going to sandwich them between the layers it goes between, so it shows up here. I'm going to hit P. Actually, yeah, I'll do P, Shift, S for position and scale. And I want to scale them down, and I was doing this earlier, so I scaled them down to about 32%. So that I have the lock aspect ratio. I'll type in 32. And they're both X and Y was 32 for the scale, or height and width, I mean. Position it. I'm going to start it over to the right. But before I do that, I want it to walk from right to left. So I want to flip it, the horizontal of this. And you may be doing that depending on, you might build your character in multiple ways, but have them walking different ways. So I'm going to unlock the aspect ratio. Come to this first scaling here, and I'll set that to -32, and hit the return button. Now I flipped his position. Now I'll lock the aspect ratio back up again, just in case I decide I want to make him bigger or smaller. So I'm going to kind of line them up with these stepping stones here. Zoom up on this. It's kind of lined up there, and I'll zoom back out. And then I'll take the X position, put them over to the side here. So that's the start position, and then in 10 seconds I'll have it walk across and end up over here. So I'm going to come to my first, what I want to do is set a keyframe for the position. I'm not going to be scaling the character. The character is going to stay consistent with the background. So I'm going to hit key position for the start there. Go to the end of my composition. Mostly on the Windows-based computers, you would have an end key that you can click. On the Mac-based ones, we do function, right arrow. Brings me to the last keyframe down here. The last end of my, not keyframe, but the end of my comp. And because I initiated the keyframe, as soon as I move the character, it will put a keyframe in there. So I'll hold my shift key and pan it over to here. By holding the shift key, it just goes greater distance at a time. So I'll bring it to about there in the 10 seconds. And if you had a walk cycle, this is where you would move it back and forth to see if the feet are slipping forward or backwards. Because I don't have a walk cycle finished now, so I'm just doing a placeholder. So I'm kind of guessing I want them to go this far in the 10 seconds, and I'll do that. So I'll hit the play. Control 0 on the Mac, so it plays as it walks through. So there's no movement, but I have them going through there. So I've set this up, and then I've made a new composition what I want to be at my final size. And I made this one already, so I have this here, and I can take this and put it on this side. So keep my flow, my order from left to right there. And this one, if I look at my composition settings, I made this HDTV format 720, 29.97. So I use that preset, which then gives me a width of 1280 by 720. And at my 29.97 and in 10 seconds here also. So it's a different size, but this is what my final output size will be. So just say okay here. What I want to do is copy these frames, and I will copy that camera move or the pan move of the character in there also. So I'll select them, hold the shift key, select them all, right click on them. Oh no, not actually in After Effects, I apologize. We don't right click. We just select them and hit Control C or Command C to copy them. So I've copied them. Come over to here, click inside of my layers area and do Command V to paste it, Command or Control V, and I pasted them. So if I look at it, at some point the character should come through this scene. There it comes through there. So with them still all highlighted like this, I want to turn them into 3D layers. So now this is where we're going to start doing the 3D part. So in the previous pre-comp, I didn't need them to be 3D. I didn't want them to be 3D. I wanted to add them 3D here. And you might not need to do a pre-comp, but because I have the character moving through the background, it helps to do the pre-comp. If you were going straight zooming into a background, and your character wasn't, you might move your character in 3D also. So every move might be a little different, but if you are doing a pan, it's good to set up a pre-comp. If you're doing more of a straight zoom in with you and the character, maybe we can work it that you don't need to pre-comp it, and we can look at those on an individual basis. But in your final comp, you are going to want to turn them into 3D layers. So if I click the one because they're all highlighted, they'll all turn 3D. So I have that, and then that's key to do that. And then before I do anything else, let's see. Yeah, let's bring the camera in first. So yeah, maybe before I bring the camera, I'm going to do the views and just kind of eyeball where I want to put these different elements. So over here I have one view, and I'm only seeing one view in my screen here. So if I want to change that to 2 views horizontal so I can see a top view of my layers. So these are all my layers, and right now they're all on that same plane if we're thinking of the 3D world. So what I want to do with my sky, I want to push that way back, and I want to bring my foreground elements closer to my camera. And let's bring the camera in. Let's do that. So I'll go Layer, New, Camera. And I want to use a 1-node camera. The 2-node camera, you have to worry about a lot of different things in this. So it's when you're doing these pans and this parallax in this version, use a 1-node camera. You'll be able to work easier. 35 millimeter, it's good, 35, 50 millimeter. If I did 24 millimeter, it's a little more of a wider lens. 35, 50 millimeter, the lenses depth get a little different as you go to the higher millimeters. So I'm just going to go with 35 millimeter, but you can experiment to see which ones work. But 35 millimeter is a good choice if you don't want to spend time experimenting. And let's see, I'm not going to have depth of field. I'm going to keep it in focus when I do my moves, and then I can go back to my different layers and animate some blurs on there to accentuate the camera move if I want to do that. So right now I'll say okay here. Brings my camera in. And now I want to look at my layer. So I'm going to come to my sky layer, and I'm going to hit P for position. And I'm going to go to the Z position, and I'm going to push that back in space. Now as I do that, it does get smaller. It is shrinking in there. And because there's not a lot of detail in that background, and I'm not going to see too much of it, I'm going to do Shift S for scale, and I'm going to scale that up so it kind of fills the frame in there. Put my sun there. Just I'm looking at this outside frame and make sure it's not falling out anywhere. So kind of seeing that sun at that point. You know what? The way I have this set up, I might not see that at all, but yeah, we can do something different. So we have that. Then I have my midground layer, which is the main forest area here, and my character. I'm going to leave them right here in the center. I want to keep those two, I would say, married together, that they're together. So I'm not going to change them, but I have my foreground element. I'm going to do position on that, and I want to bring them closer to me. So I'll push them up. And so I'm creating this depth by having foreground layer, my character and my midground are here together, and then my background element, in this case is the sky, is pushed further back. So I have that, got the positions there, and now I want to start looking at moving my camera around so I could see what kind of camera moves I want to do. So with these background elements spread out in the 3D world, now we can see what we want to see with our camera. So I'll roll these ones up, come to my camera, and hit P for your position for the camera. Probably go back to one view. I think I can. Let's see. And I'm not seeing anything, so I'm going to pan my camera over this way. So I'm panning it to the right. And I don't want to see edges there, so I want to come in here. And I can pan the camera down a little bit. So I'm seeing a little more here. And if I don't want to start this scene with this element right in front of him, I can come to that layer, which is my foreground layer. Hit P for position there. And push that up, push it over a little bit. I don't know what there I got that ledge. Let's see. I could even start the character over a little more. If you did work a walk cycle out, you got to be careful with starting the character over. I'll leave the character there. I'll just kind of, so I'm just kind of setting up my initial staging of where I want things. Start moving things around in 3D space. It kind of changes a little bit from where you drew it. So you have a little more flexibility of where things line up. And that's why, I say do things on layers. You can kind of get that to work. So that looks pretty good. So I'm just going to go along the timeline, and he goes through here. And now I'll just see. So what I'm going to animate is I animated the character moving from right to left in my pre-comp. So now the only thing I'm going to animate is my camera, the position of my camera. So I'm going to, at frame 1, initiate a keyframe. Click on the keyframe here. And then I'm going to come down to my last frame, see what I could, in this case, function right arrow. And I've come to the end. And so because I put a keyframe in at the beginning, so I start panning this over this way. Again, I can hold my shift key as I pan. And I see my character there. So as I pan, I'm not really seeing too much of that sky, am I? I could try pulling out here. So I want to make sure I'm on that keyframe. And you have the keys J and K. J takes you to your previous keyframe, and K takes you to your next keyframe. But I want to make sure my keyframes are set up. So I could lower this down a little bit. Do I see any of that sun? Maybe pull the camera back a little bit. I don't want to see too much of the edge here. I'm starting to see edge. So I'll bring that over a little. So I want to end up there. And just to make it a little different, I'm not on the keyframe here. It looks close, but I'm not there. I'm not seeing it highlighted in my keyframe right here. So I'm going to hit the letter J and make sure that this is blue before I do any other movement, so I don't want to add extra keyframes in there. And so now I'm going to zoom in on them. So I'll come in on the character, and now I'm losing them a little bit. So I'll pan over, pan up. And you can see how when I pan up, how that rock is moving different. Right now it's like it's at his neck, but now it's at its waist, and that's the parallax panning effect. Because that's in the foreground, that's why it's not moving the exact same. If they were locked down on the same layer and not in this 3D world, that rock would always be there in relationship to where his waist is. But because I'm moving my camera and that's closer to the camera, that's there. So if I start the scene there and I just pan through and see what's going on, hit the Control 0. So if more layers you have, the more depth you can create. And I really probably could push that sun back further because the sun really shouldn't move. It is moving a little bit. It's rising up there. But if I stop this in here, we see this tree. at first it's kind of lined up. If we look at this tree in the background, this edge, if we weren't in the 3D parallax world, that would always stay in relationship to there. But because we're working in 3D and parallax, this tree is going to move faster than this tree in the background. So if we go through there, and by the time we get here, this tree is on the other side of that tree. It's subtle, but it does create that different, that gives that depth to your images, to your camera moves, and it creates a depth that you don't see. So I could even, with these layers, put a little blur on them if I wanted. So in this foreground layer, it does have some blur on it, but I could put a little more. With that selected, go to Effects, Blur and Sharpen, maybe a Gaussian blur on that. Goes to my Effects Control here. Could blur it out, and I could get it. It just adds a little more depth to it also. The thing is with this background, maybe a couple of different layers would help it to add blur to the layers that are behind them. Right now this is pretty built in, so if this background, you know, if this tree was on this background but these elements were on another layer, you could blur those out if you wanted to. But adding that blur gives that depth of focus that the camera itself is not creating, but you can simulate that by adding some blur to it. So that's the basic of it. You want to set it up in 3D layers, get your camera set up, and then once you get them set up, then you're moving your camera either on the Z-plane into your scene. In this case, it's moving on the Z-plane outward. So it starts tight, the camera's backing up as it pans over. And it all depends on what camera move you're trying to achieve and do it, but if you build it in layers, you'll get a cool look. But if you build it